So, today I'll be continuing with my schedule discussion and point spread prediction videos. Today I'll be doing Florida. Uh, if you've been watching for a while, I've been saying for a long time now that Florida's going to be terrible this year, and it's really not their roster that is going to make them look terrible this year. The roster is actually probably pretty average compared to all the other Power Four teams, but uh, mm, it's for two other reasons. One is the schedule. This is no doubt the toughest schedule in the country this year. They had at least the second toughest schedule last year, but this one is even tougher than their schedule was last year. Mm, this is probably the toughest schedule I've ever seen. And then another reason is uh, coaching. Uh, they have a coach that mm, has been a good recruiter, but a terrible game time coach, and he's not very good at uh, coaching young players to be good college athletes. I'm 99% sure that they'll be making a coaching change probably before this season is over. Uh, mm, but for sure after uh, the season's over. I'll be surprised if they haven't fired their head coach by the Florida State game. And uh, so if Florida was in the ACC, they would probably be one of the uh, top half teams in the conference. But uh, being in the SEC, they do have one of the worst rosters there. Mm, uh, so on this schedule, they play three uh, Power Four teams in the non-conference, and they play four non-conference games. So uh, I don't think I'd ever seen that before. Uh, and they're all in the state of Florida, Miami, Central Florida, and Florida State, and uh, the Miami game, the opener there. It's a game that in the non-conference, I'm not really looking that forward to. I probably won't end up watching much of it because not only am I not a fan of Florida or Miami, uh, uh, neither one of them has been any good recently. I know they've both been good in the past, but uh, they're not good programs right now. It being at home for Florida will give them a good chance to win that one. Uh, but right now, Miami has a better roster than Florida does. Mm, and mm, Central Florida, uh, it being at home for Florida will give them a really good chance mm, because Florida does have mm, one of uh, the best home field advantages in the country. Mm, and Florida, I think, does have a better roster than Central Florida does, but Central Florida has a better head coach than Florida. So that's one that could really go either way. And uh, their rival Florida State on the road is going to be really tough for Florida to be able to win. They'll have a chance because even though Florida State's probably going to have a much better team than Florida again, those rivalry games uh, are usually competitive no matter what. Uh, and they only get one easy win on the whole schedule. That's Samford. Mm. And then uh, they start their conference schedule against Texas A&M, mm, and that's probably going to be a loss for Florida. It is a home game though, and we don't really know how good Texas A&M is going to be, but uh, they no doubt have a better roster than Florida does mm, right now. But mm, with it being at Florida, Florida, uh, I think we'll have a chance to uh, get a win there. Mm, and then uh, next, they play Mississippi State on the road. Uh, so that's a game that Florida could lose. Uh, mm, if it was a game that was a home game, I think it would very likely be a win for Florida because uh, Florida, I think, does have a little better roster than Mississippi State, but uh, still, that's going to be tough. Mm, and then next in the conference, they play Tennessee on the road. That's going to be really tough for Florida to be able to win. Uh, Tennessee is a really tough place to play, uh, and they're very likely going to have a better team than Florida this year. But good news for Florida is they've owned Tennessee. They are 17-2 against them in the last 19 years. Mm, so I can't really say that Florida can't win that game. Mm, and then next they play Kentucky. That'll be a game that, uh, especially at home, Florida will have a decent chance in. But it will be a tough one. Kentucky, I think, has a good chance to be in the top 25 this year. And then they take a week off before their biggest SEC rival, uh, Georgia. That game will be played in Jacksonville, Florida, which will be a neutral game. That's where it's always been played since I've watched football. Uh, and Georgia has not only beaten Florida the last 3 years, but they've blown them out the last 3 years. And I don't expect it to be any different this year. Florida just has no chance to win that game this year. Uh, they'll be lucky to uh, get within 3 touchdowns of Georgia this year. And I think after that game is when they'll fire their head coach because they'll get blown out by their biggest SEC rival. Uh, and I like where uh, the first week off comes uh, right before Central Florida because that's one of their most winnable games. Uh, and uh, really, these last 5 games here for Florida, uh, they don't get a break in between them, and those are all uh, going to be teams that are going to be ranked in the top 15 to begin the season. So that's the toughest 5 in a row I think I've ever seen. It makes you wonder if Florida's being punished by the SEC for having that uh, mm, because the on the road at Texas after playing Georgia, that is just awful. Mm, Texas is likely going to blow Florida out too. Mm, they'll be lucky to get within 3 touchdowns of them. Uh, and uh, after that, LSU, uh, they've been their rival from the opposite uh, division. Uh, and even with it being at Florida, uh, I don't see Florida having much of a chance in that one this year. Uh, and LSU's beat them 8 out of the last 10 years and the last 5 in a row. Uh, and then after that, Ole Miss and like with LSU, even though it's at Florida, uh, Ole Miss I think is just going to be way too good this year for Florida to have much of a chance against. Mm, so mm, now I'll move on to the prediction. Uh, so, if you want, you can watch my Ohio State video of these, and I explain the point spreads better in it. But uh, the games in the green are games where I think that mm, Florida will be favored to win by a blowout, 20 or more points. And there's only one of those, Samford. Mm, And uh, the games in the uh, pink are uh, the games where I think they'll be favored to win by about a field goal, so 1 to 5 points, and there are two of those, Miami and Central Florida. Mm, And uh, mm, the games in the black are the toss-up games, games where right now you wouldn't think there'd be a favorite in. Uh, and there are two of those, Mississippi State and Kentucky. Uh, and mm, uh, the games in the gray are the games where I think Florida will be about a field goal underdog in. And there's one of those, Texas A&M. Uh, and the games in the yellow or the games where I think Florida will be about a touchdown underdog in, so 6 to 9 points. Uh, and there's two of those, Tennessee and Florida State. Uh, and the games in the orange are games where I think Florida will be a double-digit underdog, but not a blowout underdog, so 10 to 19 points. Uh, and there's two of those, LSU and Ole Miss. Mm, and the games in the red are games where I think Florida will be a blowout underdog in, so that's 20 or more points. And there's two of those, Georgia and Texas. Uh, so mm, Samford, they should be favored in that one by like 40 points. They shouldn't have any problem there. Uh, but uh, Miami is a really tough one. Uh, mm, I could see Miami being favored in it, or it even being a toss-up. But because it's at Florida, I kind of think Florida might be favored by a point in that one. Mm, and then Central Florida, Florida, I think will probably be favored by about three in that one. Uh, mm, and mm, uh, Mississippi State, that's just a toss up because it's a road game. Mm. And then Kentucky, it's just a toss up because it's a home game. I do think Kentucky will be better than Florida. Mm, and mm, uh, Texas A&M, mm, Florida will probably be uh, like a 4 or 5 point underdog in that one. Mm, if it was at A&M, I think Florida would probably be a touchdown underdog. Mm, and mm, mm, Tennessee, uh, Florida will probably be about a 7 point underdog in that one. Mm, And mm, Florida State, mm, I think that Florida will at least be a 7 point underdog in that one, but uh, shouldn't be any more than 9 points. And uh, LSU, I think Florida will be about a 10 point underdog in that game. Uh, and then mm, Ole Miss, I think Florida will be about a 14 point underdog in that one. Uh, and uh, Georgia and Texas. Florida will be an underdog in those probably by uh, somewhere in the low 20s, at least 3 touchdowns. And uh, this schedule is just going to be, I think, too tough for Florida to get a bowl game this year, uh, because they could really go 1-11 with this schedule. I'm not saying I think they will. I don't think they'll go 1-11, uh, but there's a really good chance that they'll go 4-8 because they have uh, 9 teams on here uh, that have a good chance to be in the top 25 this year, and uh, they have 6 opponents on here that are all very likely going to be in the top 25 this year. Um, mm, so uh, that will be it with this video, and please subscribe, and thanks for watching another video, and I'll be back on here soon.